what I wanted to do is give you a few snippets about the IRB and remind you that the information for anybody to conduct research, we have partnered, Norfolk State has partnered with universities in the past, research from the actual summit. And this invitation is open to other universities, and the information will be made available as you develop partnerships to carry on research. Some of the key items in the IRB, particularly as this session progresses, is that each person has an opportunity not to participate. You will be going through something called fish bowls. And in the fishbowl, we have asked you to identify yourself, just as courtesy. However, that identification can be dropped if you decide to opt out of the research. And what I'm talking about is the simple fact that you decide that you don't want your name or your university to be attached anyway to anyone's research. This protects you from your personal identity. And it also, for your sake, might protect you also from university concerns. So you do have the opportunity to either participate or opt out of the research. All of your information, if you do decide to share, all of the information from this particular conference or summit is confidential. Everything is private, no names attached, no complete anonymity in terms of this conference. There are no risk factors. We do not plan or intend in any way or in any foreseeable way see any risk in this particular research, whether it's psychological or physical. And we want to make sure that all participants for the IRB are assured that the research projects are completely confidential and are conducted with high ethical processes and procedures, and that human subjects are not a part of this particular process. Only your information in terms of your comments. And again, you do not want your name attached, please let us know. If you have any concerns or questions about the process to continue or not in the research component, please let us know. Thank you. At this time, I would like to also welcome Dr. James Banks to the University of Washington. I want us to, it's a great honor and a great distinction to be able to introduce two Kappa Delta Pi Summit participants. Some of us have known him as the father of multiculturalism. Dr. James Banks is an educator laureate who is the founder of the Center of Multicultural Education at the University of Washington. Among his extended list of articles, books, and research is the new publication, Critical Race Theory in Education. This edited work provides a lens of CRT as seen by Gloria Ladson-Billings. It is through his profound works that we as educators can better see our pathway toward a more equitable society. Please, let's put our hands together to welcome Dr. James Banks.
Dr. Goodloe, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, my dear friend and colleague for many decades. Professor Ladson-Billings is Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She is a former president of the American Educational Research Association, AERA, and I'll be referring to AERA throughout my introduction, so I won't be spelling it out again, but AERA, she's the former president of AERA and is the current president of the National Academy of Education. Since the publication of her book, The Dreamkeepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children in 1994, and her widely cited article on culturally relevant pedagogy in the American Educational Research Journal in 1995, Professor Ladson-Billings has been one of the most eloquent, visionary, prolific, and influential voices calling for the transformation of the nation's schools and classrooms to make them more equitable for African Americans and other students of color. She is one of the original creators of culturally relevant, or culturally responsive pedagogy. In addition to her innovative, original, and visionary work on culturally relevant pedagogy, Professor Ladson-Billings and her co-author, William F. Tate, are pioneers who developed the scholarship on who adapted the scholarship on critical race theory from law to education. In 1995, she and Tate published their groundbreaking article toward a critical theory of education in Teachers College Record. This is a classical article that has unlimited influence. In her AERA presidential address, Dr. Ladson-Billings describes concepts and explanations that will enhance social justice and educational equality. She deconstructs the achievement gap concept. She argues that rather than focus on the achievement gap, educators should concentrate on the education debt in order to make progress in improving the academic achievements of students from diverse and marginalized groups. She wrote in this presidential address, and I quote, "We do not have an achievement gap. We have an education debt," end of quote. She explains why our focus on the achievement gap will divert attention from dealing with the deep structural problems that are the root cause of the differential achievement of low-income students of color and mainstream white students. Her most recent book, and I want you to see it, published in the Multicultural Education series that I edited for Teachers College Press that Dr. Goodloe referred to. I want you to see it. It's called Critical Race Theory in Education, A Scholar's Journey. A very timely, very important book. Again, I want to give you the name of it, Critical Race Theory in Education, A Scholar's Journey. This book is especially timely and important because of the attacks on diversity in the study of race in the United States that is masquerading as an attack on critical race theory. Dr. Ladson-Billings' book provides important insights and careful research on this contentious debate. Some states have passed laws which make it more difficult to teach about race and racism in the United States. Dr. Ladson-Billings' book contains explanations and examples that will support teachers. So I'd really recommend this book for all teachers in schools because it's a good ammunition to respond to these attacks. Dr. Ladson-Billings is the author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. She is the former editor of the American Educational Research Journal and a member of several editorial boards. Her work has won numerous scholarly awards, including a Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship from the National Academy of Education, the Palmer O. Johnson Outstanding Research Award from AERA, and the AERA Social Justice and Education Award in 2015. In 2012, she received the Brock International Prize in Education. She received AERA's most prestigious research award in 2018, which is the AERA Distinguished Contributions to Research in Education Award. During the 2003-2004 academic year, she was a fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences at Stanford, which was a distinguished recognition of her eminent stature in the field. She has also received honorary degrees from universities in both the United States and abroad. She has received honorary degrees from Colorado College, Morgan State University, and the University of Massachusetts-Lowell in the US. She has received honorary degrees from Umeå University in Sweden and the University of Alicante in Spain. Professor Ladson-Billings is not only a distinguished scholar and researcher, she is also one of my most cherished friends and colleagues. I'm very pleased to present to you Professor Gloria Ladson-Billings.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you for that most lovely introduction. I mean, someone's probably saying, how can he just go on and on about this woman? But what people need to know that this fall, I will have known Jim Banks for 50 years. We first met in 1971. He didn't know who I was, but I knew who he was at the University of Washington. But I am delighted. Now, we met 50 years ago, Jim, but I was 5 and you were 7, okay? Thank you so much. I realize I don't have a lot of time with you, about 15 minutes. So I'm going to try to rush through some ideas that I hope will be helpful for your further discussion. So the first thing I'd like to do is share my screen, make sure that we got everything in place. Let's see. And all righty, so someone will tell me if you are not seeing this.
We can see it.
You can see it. So real quickly, I want to talk about this notion of, well, who will teach the children, and then pick up on your theme of recruiting, preparing, and retaining teachers of color. I'm actually going to set my timer so I don't ramble, because I will do just that. That's the hallmark of being a professor. But I want to set a context for you, and I've been talking about this for the last 19 months, and that is that the young people that we are serving are in the midst of 4 pandemics. Now, I know somebody's going, 4. We got our hands full with 1. What is she talking about? Well, of course, that's the one you know about. The novel coronavirus. I won't take time to talk about what it is and its impact, but it's not the only pandemic. There is a pandemic of racism, and particularly anti-Black racism. And the reason I can call it a pandemic is because it is not just happening in the United States. When George Floyd was murdered, I heard from colleagues in the UK, colleagues in France, colleagues in Canada, colleagues in Australia, all of whom said, we deal with this too. The third pandemic is the coming economic collapse. I think it will be next to impossible, unless some drastic things begin to turn around, for us to be able to pull up out of some of the situations that we find ourselves in. So for example, 2.8 million women left the workforce in the midst of the coronavirus. So this is a pandemic that is trailing the coronavirus. And I call it pandemic because we are a globally interconnected economy. If we don't buy things in the United States, producers don't make things in other countries, and then those people are without jobs. People are facing foreclosure, they're facing eviction. So that's the third one. The fourth one is, of course, environmental catastrophe. And I know a lot of times people want to poo-poo it. No, that's just happening in California. I happen to put up a picture from the California fires because I'm a grandmother whose grandchildren all live in California. But that's not the only place we're seeing these climate issues. Clearly in the Gulf Coast region, you've seen more storms and more intense storms. Labor Day weekend, I was in New York visiting my brother, and we got there the day after all of that horrific flash flooding decimated parts of New Jersey and New York. So it sounds like a lot of gloom and doom, but I want to suggest to you, as educators, there is a silver lining in the midst of all of this. And I take that silver lining from the work of an Indian novelist by the name of Arundhati Roy. She has a wonderful article called "The Pandemic is a Portal." If you have not read it, I will encourage you. You can find it for free online, no firewalls, to be able to pick it up. But I want to select something out of that particular article that I think is instructive. And she says that historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So indeed, I am urging us as educators to take that second course, to walk through lightly with little luggage and begin to imagine another world and be ready to fight for that world. So in case I run out of time, I want to do a kind of long story short piece here of what's happening.
Teachers of color are underrepresented in the U.S. workforce and leave the profession at a higher rate than their white peers. The primary reasons cited: isolation and a lack of support. But having teachers of color yields positive outcomes for all students. They force classrooms to break down negative stereotypes, help students understand and confront racism, and prepare students to live in a multicultural society. And for many students of color, it can be life-changing. A 2018 study found that Black students who had a single Black teacher were 13% more likely to enroll in college. With 2 Black teachers, that number jumps to 32%. For Black boys, the impact is even more powerful. Having a Black teacher cut high school dropout rates by 39% for Black boys from low-income families. It's not just because they are seeing a role model who looks like them, though the research says that does matter. Compared to their white counterparts, Black teachers have higher expectations for Black students, and they're less likely to perceive Black students as disruptive, inattentive, or unable to do homework. So there's a gap in representation, and it's holding all of our students back. The demographic data reveals the scope of the problem. Nearly 80% of U.S. teachers are white, but a majority of students are children of color. We must do the hard work of addressing the diversity problem in our teaching workforce. Students need to see their own cultures reflected in the adults responsible for their learning.
So that's the story in a nutshell. Let me just quickly tell you a little bit about my own story. In my K-6 years, and that is actually the school I attended, is now a charter school in West Philadelphia. I have 4 Black teachers out of the 7 teachers that I had from kindergarten through grade 6. And I remember them quite vividly. Mrs. Glenn, my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Harris, my 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Ben, my 5th grade teacher, and Mrs. Hall, my 6th grade teacher. And Mrs. Ben was my difference maker. Now I will tell you right now, that is not a picture of Mrs. Ben. I couldn't find one. I searched, I looked, I checked obituaries, I checked everywhere. Couldn't find a picture of Mrs. Ben, but that's kind of how she looked. She was my 5th grade teacher. And one of the things that she did for me is that she taught what might be considered an unauthorized curriculum. If you were to sit in school board meetings today, the kinds of stuff she's doing might be banned. But she taught this unauthorized curriculum about Black history and culture, what Rudine Sims might call, gave us a mirror, that we could see ourselves in the curriculum. She also showed us a world beyond our neighborhood. She took us to community events, and she was in charge of the chorus. And if you were in her class, you had to be in the chorus. Doesn't matter whether you could, carry a note strapped to your back. You were going to be in that chorus. She took us all over the city, and so we saw other neighborhoods and communities. And so that was the window that Rudine Sims often talks about. And then she pushed us to what today people call Black excellence, providing that sliding glass door between where we were and where we needed to go. You heard some of the demographic data in the short video. You see that the teachers in the left graph are portrayed in blue in the pie chart. Something like 79% of the teachers are white. Black teachers represent 7%, Latinx 9%, Asian descent 2%, mixed race 2%. If you look at the students, the white students are 47% of the student population in public schools. Black students, 15%, Latinx students are 17%. So make sure I get to this. So what's different today? Well, we know that 38,000 Southern Black teachers lost their jobs between 1954 and 1965. And you don't have to be a genius to know that 1954 was a landmark year with the Brown decision coming out of the Supreme Court. Those teachers were willing to give up those jobs on behalf of the children. So they lost their jobs. We also know that HBCUs that produce the lion's share of Black teacher preparation are underfunded and began to struggle with accreditation. I will say that I am a proud HBCU graduate, Morgan State University, go Bears, okay. But we also know some states began to institute competency tests that decrease the number of Black teachers, and that Black college students now have options beyond teaching. They can go to business school or law school and have other professional opportunities. We know that there is a high cost of college and university loan indebtedness. So why take out all of these loans for a job that's only going to pay you $40,000? And the bottom line is we have to look at high school graduation rates. If our young people don't graduate from high school, how can we talk about them becoming teachers? The other question I think we have to raise is what happens when teachers of color do enter the profession? First and foremost, they're much more likely to elect to teach in schools that are serving students of color. Here I am at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Very few of my students want to work in Milwaukee, in Beloit, and Racine. And increasingly, they don't want to work in Madison because Madison has a student population that is about 52% students of color. It seems kind of weird to say that I'm in the middle of Wisconsin, but that's the reality. They enter these schools and they're often isolated. We already saw the demographics say that 80% of their colleagues are white, so they may be the one teacher of color. And when they get there, they are asked to attend to discipline and the so-called diversity issue. So they don't get to be a part of the conversation about curriculum decisions or pedagogical innovation. No, it's like, can you take care of these kids? Can you be on our diversity committee? Can you talk to those parents of color? And so what eventually happens is that we see a pattern of burnout and they begin to leave. So what is it that we can do? Well, I think we have to begin the recruitment process much earlier. We try to pick up people at college, right? As freshmen. In many ways, it's too late. Think about the experiences that their white colleagues than white peers have had before coming to college and university. I know in this neighborhood, we have children, babies, have Wisconsin Badger t-shirts, and the little girls often have the Wisconsin cheerleader uniforms, and they're 3 and 4 years old. So they're already being recruited and being by their families to say, you will go to Wisconsin. We wait till high school to try to recruit folks, and it's just too late. So we have to start the process to recruit them to become teachers much earlier, and offer summer pre-collegiate programs. If I go on most campuses, I will find STEM pre-collegiate programs. Here at Wisconsin, we have chemistry camp, we got a biology lab, we might have a math program. We don't have any pre-teaching programs. And so we have to begin to do that work. We also need to develop more dual enrollment programs. That is that we need to be working with some high schools so that some of the students can be earning college credit while they're in high school. We know that there's been a lot of research done that says that that senior year is often wasted for students. They've completed their requirements. So they should be doing dual enrollment, starting to take those college credits. And we definitely have to begin to guarantee tuition and living costs, or at least something that looks like loan forgiveness. People cannot go into debt to take a position that isn't going to pay well. And I am very, very adamant about the need to invest in teacher education in both HBCUs and HSIs. We have got to go where the students are. And I just got some news a couple of days ago about accreditation issues for an HBCU. These are the folks who have produced our teachers of color for many years, and now they find themselves in situations where they can't even keep their programs. And then the final thing I'll say to you is that we have to begin to expand the so-called boutique programs. So if you think of a program like Call Me Mr. at Clemson and at a number of other places, they are small programs dedicated to preparing mostly Black male teachers. I think we can expand those, and I think we have to expand those. So I am actually right on time, and I'm going to stop right there. My timer's going off. And once again, thank you so much for your willingness to be here and your commitment to ensuring that we diversify, that we recruit, retain, and prepare more teachers of color. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ladson-Billings. And we, of course, are very touched by the presentation. And I really like the journey from the tale of 2 pandemics to the windows, the mirrors, and the sliding glass doors, that process of holding up the mirror so people can see role models and educators like themselves. So thank you for this. We did want to open it up for some questions, and I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions for you. So I don't know if everyone knows how to use the reactions feature at the bottom of your screen typically, but if you click reactions, you can click the button that says raise hand. If you have a question you would or a comment that you'd like to make in response to the wonderful and presentation we just heard. So if anyone would like to raise your hand, and then I can call on you and you can ask Dr. Ladson-Billings a question, or feel free to add your own commentary. Dr. Ardley, you look like you're trying to raise your hand.
Actually, Dr. Roslyn has her hand up.
Oh, okay. I got to switch back and forth.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Dr. Oh, there you go. Okay, go ahead. Dr. Roslyn.
Okay, thanks so much. And to Dr. Ladson-Billings, my first question is, who will follow you? That's my biggest worry. I mean, we value you. We value Dr. Banks so much. Who are your proteges? And my next is not a question, it's a comment. I'm retired, okay, but I have really been trying to find out how to bring back the future teachers of America. That's number one. And then the other thing is at Xavier, they now have a liaison for the military recruitment. And for those of us my age, I don't know too many on my age or not, but in the 50s, I would imagine Xavier had a program specifically designed for recruiting military returnees, African Americans, and they were in the teacher ed program. So now I think the state of Louisiana, or maybe it's the federal government, I just know that one of our members in our chapter of Kappa Delta Pi is going to be that liaison to try and recruit military to Xavier, but he is a former principal. So he will really be pushing teacher education. So that's my first comment. Who are you going to recommend to us to say, look at their reading, look at their research to get some ideas? I know you gave us one or two. And then the other is about the bringing back future teachers of America and recruiting the military. Thank you again so much for your expertise.
Well, thank you so much. Both Dr. Banks and I have been preparing folks to follow our work for many, many years. When I had my quote legacy conference, when I retired from Wisconsin in 2018, at that point I had produced 55 scholars, 55 young people with PhDs, 19 of them. Now, remember, I'm at Wisconsin, so I'm in a very white state, but 19 of them were Black women, another 5 of them Black men. And then I also have, of course, some Latinx, some Indigenous scholars. So the work of people like Dr. Adrian Dixon at the University of Illinois, Dr. Jamel Donner at William and Mary. I've just had wonderful Dr. Tondika Chapman out at the University of California, San Diego. So I've had them go all over the place. And then I've mentored people who are not been my students. So people like Kamika Royal at Loyola of Maryland, Dr. Dodo Sawicki, who was at Morgan State. So we've tried to, Dr. Banks was the advisor and I was the external advisor for Dr. Tyrone Howard at UCLA. So we have tried to get people out there and they are doing great work. I like the pick up on that point you made about military service, because I've been someone who argued that everybody in a democracy should be providing some kind of service. Now, I don't want everybody to go into the armed services. That's just me personally, maybe because I'm a mom of 4 sons and I didn't want none of them to do that. 3 sons, excuse me. I didn't want any of them to do that, which they didn't. But I think we all owe a debt of service. And I think there has to be a way for us to get teaching and maybe healthcare reclassified as service. And maybe with healthcare, we're not talking about physicians, but we are talking certainly about nurses and maybe nurse practitioners. But I think that's that kind of service work, social work, teaching, nursing, giving back to the community writ large ought to get the same benefits in my mind as going into the armed services. So the idea that you become a teacher and you're eligible for a mortgage in a particular way, or you're eligible for additional schooling, all of those things I think we need to be thinking about So that I'll just stop there. I don't know if Jim wants to chime in.
Yeah, I do. I want to add that, yes, you and I have been training young people. You mentioned Tyrone Howard at UCLA, one of my students. Also, there's Nicole Joseph at Vanderbilt, Robin DiAngelo, and many of you will know her famous book, White Fragility, was one of my students. And she's here in Seattle. And also Azam Sensor. I could go on, Yiting Chu, who's at a university in Louisiana. So there's a whole group that Gloria and I and Carl Grant, we have trained a new group. I just wanted to add that. And by the way, Robin has a new book called A Nice Racism that follows a white fragility book.
Well, if I could just follow up and say we need to get them into Kappa Delta Pi, okay?
Well, Dr. Howard is a new KDP laureate that's being inducted in November, and several others are. We have the most diverse. We're inducting 5 new laureates in November, all of whom are diverse individuals with incredible backgrounds in helping grow the population of teachers of color so we can impact our students. Okay, I saw a couple of questions, but does someone else want to raise their hand and go ahead? Jennifer,
Okay, I had my hand up, Tanya.
Okay, go ahead. I can't see everybody.
No problem. Greetings, Dr. Ladson-Billings. I so appreciated what you said about before pandemics. To go a little bit further with the piece about economic collapse, as a military wife who has been and a professor who has been a part of many different institutes, be them PWIs and HBCUs. The one thing that I keep hearing from our traditional students who come into education or the ones who leave is the piece about social justice, lack of respect, and it's not sexy being a teacher. They're so pulled, Dr. Ladson-Billings, by image. I mean, this TikTok is so, I don't want to say, let's just say they're absorbed by seeing their images on TV. How can we utilize culturally relevant things of this generation to get them to see that this is still worthy? Yes, I hear the piece about giving them loan forgiveness, but I want it to be where it's not just here, we'll give you these things because of the deficits of teaching. I want them to see teaching as this is the best slice of bread. All right, so I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, well, thank you for your question. And I will say to you, because I've got these kids that span Gen X to millennials, so I get to see it all. The way in which we came into the field was you come into it and it's a lifetime career. That doesn't exist for them in any field, okay? They're not going to be lifetime doctors or lawyers. We as a field have to be much more nimble and much more flexible. I'm actually writing an editorial piece right now for the Journal of Teacher Education about what I'm calling climate change for teacher ed. And I'm not talking about just the environment. People go in and take 6, 7 jobs in a career now. Jim and I never thought about doing nothing but one thing. Okay, this is the thing we're going to do.
They sound like a military wife like me.
That's not the environment. And we've got to be more flexible. We've got to say to people, can you give us 3 years? Can you give us 5 years? Hopefully they may fall in love with it, but maybe not. But we are so worried that they come and they won't stay. Maybe not staying is one of the things that we have to begin to get used to. And in fact, what I find really interesting, my brother and I, although he's like 7 years older than me, He was a military guy out of high school. So he started college around the same time that I did. So our careers were parallel, but he was in corporate America. When he went in for that first job, you know what they said to him at IBM? What do you want to be doing in 5 years? And how can we help you get there? Even if what you want to be doing is outside of this company. Do you know what they said to me when I went to be a teacher in Philadelphia? Here go your keys, here go your curriculum guides, and we'll see you in 30 years. I mean,
Wow.
there was no human relations approach to my career, whereas his was, what can we do to build you? So
Yes, ma'am.
that's a big change that I think we have to make.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Wow, what can we do to build you? Right there says so much about everything that we're talking about. I think, we have time for one more question. Dr. Jennifer Robinson has a question.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Billings, for Ladson-Billings, for your amazing scholarship and even for today being amongst us. We really appreciate you. We honor you. We respect you, and Dr. Billings, of course. We just appreciate you. I'd like you to talk to us as those who prepare teachers. What should change about the teacher education curriculum to better influence white and non-white teachers who are preparing to be teachers to help address the racism pandemic?
First and foremost, I'm not going to pretend that I have the full answer to this, but I will tell you that often when I'm doing a presentation for teacher educators, I will put up a slide that has kind of a template that says something like 100 hours of general education credits, English, math, science, social studies, fine arts. Another 20 plus hours of advanced credits in a subject area, whether it is English or biology or whatever. Then some credit hours in foundations, history of ed, sociology of ed, child development or psychology or adolescent development. And then some field experiences, practicum, the student teaching. And I asked them, I said, does this look familiar to you? And I usually get nods all around. People say, oh yeah, this is pretty much how our program is. And then what I say to them is, that's the program I went through. And I finished in 1968. So are you telling me that there's nothing changed about the students that we are set to serve in 50 plus years? We have got to rethink the way in which we do this preparation. And I think the hardest work I do, and I actually just got finished doing a workshop for some teachers in the Minneapolis area last week, is what Yolanda Seeley-Ruiz calls the archaeology of self. We think that this work about race and racism is about other people. It's not. It's about the self. And I have students, mostly white, in pre-service teacher education, who essentially will tell you, we don't really have culture. We're just normal. To which I often say, guess that would make me abnormal. No, that's not what we mean. We're just regular. Oh yeah, that's better. I mean, and at my age, it may be true, but I don't want you calling me irregular. Okay. To really get them to understand that they have a culture and to begin to dig deep into why I see the world the way I see it, why I believe what I believe, why I, practice what I practice. That's the heavy lift that has to happen. And it has to happen before they get into teacher education. I wrote a piece, one of the last pieces I wrote, I think before I retired, that was published in the Peabody Journal of Education called The Social Funding of Race. And in it, I argued that we fund, F-U-N-D, this concept of race from the time that people are born. We fund it as little babies, where kids will point to someone and say, oh, his skin is dark. We'll censor them rather than begin to teach them so that if we're already teaching them about race, either that it is taboo and you can't talk about it, or that those people are not as good as you, we're doing that when they're 3 and 4 and 5 years old. By the time we get them 19 and 20, how do we think in 4 semesters, 2 years, we're going to turn that around? So we need partners much earlier on. And so the attacks that we're seeing across the country in K-12 education are going to have some dire consequences. It's really not about, quote, people like me. It's about that teacher that is struggling to begin to bring kids to this realization. It's about those young people who are angry and confused. And it's really the young people who put that so-called racial reckoning in our faces. It wasn't old people. There were young people in those streets. And they are confronting the adults and saying, why is this happening? So I have incredible hope in those young people. I worry about us as old folks and our willingness and our courage to keep doing the work.